Well, a very, very big welcome to everyone joining the Bicycle New South Wales and Advantage Legal webinar, which is a quarterly webinar where we try to share important, relevant information to members and supporters at Bicycle New South Wales. My name's Peter McLean and I'm the CEO at Bicycle New South Wales. I have mentioned that we are recording this session so that we can share the video footage with people who may want to have a look at it in the future. So Bicycle New South Wales is the peak industry body for bicycle riders, representing bicycle riders right across New South Wales from 8 to 80-year-olds. So we try, and our purpose is to create a better bicycle riding environment for all bicycle riders. So anyone from 8 to 80-year-olds, we try and make sure they have a better bike riding experience. We provide them with member benefits such as discounts and other benefits. And we, of course, offer them public liability and personal accident insurance cover, ensuring that if they are unfortunately involved in an accident of some type, that their person is covered, of course, and if they're found negligent, that the public liability is able to cover their needs as well. The webinar tonight is a really, really meaty, edgy topic, which is really exciting, all about private investigators and compensation claims. So we're very, very pleased to bring this subject to you tonight. Before we get into the two amazing speakers that we have in tonight's session, I also wanted to give an acknowledgement of country. I'm based in far southwestern Sydney, which is an amazing I guess, emergence of three different lands, from the mountains to the riverlands and the Cumberland woodland, being the Gundungurra, Darug and Wall people. And I want to recognise their elders past, present and emerging, and of course recognise those other lands from across Greater Sydney and regional New South Wales that might be those people that might be joining us here today. So our amazing two speakers, both thank them very, very much for their time and generous contributions in helping formulate tonight's session. Firstly, Leigh Davidson, who's the Principal Solicitor at Advantage Legal. And Advantage Legal is Bicycle New South Wales' exclusive compensation legal partner. Leigh's got extensive experience working for compensation law firms and ASX listed companies, and is committed to improving the way compensation schemes operate in New South Wales, and he's really, really passionate about that. So thanks for joining us, Leigh. And Chad Masri, who's the principal at Periscope Investigations. And Periscope Investigation specialises in all facets of investigation, servicing commercial, government and private clients. They offer a complete range of investigation services, from factual investigations, surveillance, process servicing and debt collection. And obviously, Chad's going to be focusing on the insurance side of things tonight. So we are going to be having a bit of a Q&A session tonight. We've got 10 exciting and interesting and insightful questions to hit Leigh and Chad up with. I'll be facilitating it, obviously, and Chad and Leigh will be answering the hard questions. I might just also ask those that are joining us just to turn their microphones off. If you could just mute yourself, that'd be fantastic, so we don't get too much background noise. But while you're listening to the questions and answers, make sure you will have the opportunity at the end to ask a question. You can do that in two ways. You can obviously ask a question by putting your hand up at the end and asking it the old-fashioned way. Go down to your chat section and ask that in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and it can ask the question on your behalf. But we have had a couple of questions emailed into us as well, so I might ask those if we have time. Firstly, though, I'll just ask Leigh or Chad if they wanted to begin by anything, or include any disclaimers they might want to just start off with at the start of the webinar.
Look, just
I'm fine for Leigh to go first.
for Chad.
I was just saying I'm happy for you to go first, Leigh.
Okay, sure. Just from my perspective, the information today is general in nature. It's not, we're here to educate and to provide people with information so that you're aware of things. But in order for you to sort of take in your personal circumstances, please reach out to us if you'd like. It's important because things do actually change on a case-by-case basis. Over to you, Chad.
Yeah, sure. And I'll obviously echo that. A lot of the information that I will be providing, obviously investigative techniques change day by day. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt, because there may be other techniques out there tomorrow that might not be applied today.
Ultimately, these are our opinions in any event. So,
correct.
Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate that. And we've obviously, Chad is also a private investigator and has obviously, in the interests of protecting his identity, is remaining behind with his camera off, which is really important. But I can confirm that Chad looks just like Tom Selleck, in case anyone's wondering. So that'll be my Magnum PI plug. I'm sorry about that one. Like many people, I grew up with Magnum PI as well, so that's my memories of private investigators. But now onto a serious, some introduction questions now to kick off. Chad, tell us a little bit about Periscope investigations and what your firm specialises in.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned earlier, we're a full-service investigation, intelligence and commercial agency firm. So we provide services to a range of clients. Those services range from corporate intelligence and investigations, so workplace investigations, due diligence, that sort of service, as well as commercial debt recovery, and of course litigation support in a range of matters, so commercial litigation, family law litigation, etc., etc. As it pertains to this particular webinar, of course, we also provide services in the personal injury sector, but these days, I would say the majority of our clients in that sector are plaintiffs' firms.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that introduction. And over to you, Leigh. Tell us a little bit about Advantage Legal and what your firm specialises in.
Thank you. Look, so as you mentioned previously, we're the compensation partner of Bicycle New South Wales, which is a relationship we absolutely adore. Love being able to help out cyclists. We are a law firm that purely assists injured people, primarily in the compensation space, but we do other work. So primarily we're C2P, which is motor accidents, workers' comp TPD, but we also do medical negligence and general Civil Liability Act claims. But I think most importantly, we've got extensive experience as practitioners. We've worked as assessors, just insurance companies, defendant law firms, plaintiff law firms. So we've got a very holistic experience of how things operate, particularly in this space. And both the principals of this practice are both accredited specialists in personal injury law. So this is what we do, and we're very passionate about it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Leigh, and it's great to have you on board. Well, another question then for Chad is, when an injured person lodges a claim, why do insurance companies hire a private investigator to investigate?
Look, at a base level, insurers are typically hiring investigation firms to, I guess, assess the potential of fraud in the claim, and at a holistic level to ensure that their expenditures can be accounted for. So I guess the main aspect of the investigator is to conduct investigations to look for fraud. If there is fraud or if there's an exaggeration of the claim, the insurer will look to utilize that information to either deny the claim or use that in negotiations to reduce the quantum of the claim. Now, when it comes to schemes where the insurers are administering the claim on behalf of a government-regulated scheme, such as CTP or workers' compensation, obviously the insurers have a statutory obligation and a contractual obligation to deter fraudulent claims in that aspect.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And Leigh, what's the most common problem you as a compensation lawyer see from an insurance company using a private investigator?
Look, I think some of the challenges that injured people have, in particular, or from the perspective of an injured person, is that the private investigator is obviously on a panel a lot of the time so I'm talking exclusively here of people that have been the investigation firms that have been employed by the insurers. I'm speaking broadly, but obviously there's, I'm talking about the bad experiences. There's plenty of good ones too, but the bad experiences that you tend to see, and where injured people are sort of none the wiser, you see twisted factual investigations. So where an injured person has been interviewed and they might be in a drug-induced state still. They might be on heavily medicated, and they don't really understand the questions that are getting put to them, but that becomes a transcript and it gets used as evidence against them. So, we have to sort of unpick that and understand the circumstances. There's then certain facts will be omitted from the inclusion in a report because it may not represent necessarily what the insurance company's point of view is. So you get that flavour of bias from an investigator where they've been engaged again by the insurance company. There might be completely irrelevant questions that are being asked in order to obtain additional information, a way of actually not looking at the circumstances of the action, but a way of actually then negating the claim. So they might be looking at ways of, essentially trying to just literally minimize the overall quantum that is paid out. There could be partially complete investigations. There could be clear bias in them. I suppose the main message to injured people is that if you've got an insurer that's appointed an investigator, they've been appointed to protect their interests, all right? Fraud within the scheme is an insurer's interest to stop, all right? Because the insurer is the one that has to pay it out. So it's in their interest to make sure that fraud is investigated, that claims are actually, that are legitimate. These are all valid reasons. But what happens is that legitimate claims get caught up in this process and some can be adversely affected. So beyond the fraud element, injured people need to be generally aware that there are not ulterior reasons, but the things are not always as they appear. And so you need somebody with that sort of experience and background to be aware of what's going on to support you.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Leigh. Chad, another question for you. Can you give us a quick rundown of the types of ways that a private investigator gathers surveillance and information on injured people claiming compensation?
Yeah, sure. So I know you mentioned Magnum PI earlier, and most people's perceptions of what investigators do come from movies and TV shows. So most people will be familiar with the concept of private investigator parked in a car with a video camera or following somebody around to get footage of the person's movements. So this type of surveillance is, in our industry, it's called typically static surveillance, which is either sitting in a car or location, or mobile surveillance, which is following a person on foot. So insurers have also become fond of what's termed in the insurance space as desktop investigations, but what we call in the investigative community as open source intelligence gathering. So this is typically information that's gathered from people's social media, from online forums, from articles in newspapers, so on and so forth. And this information is used often to get leads to give the investigator a better understanding of how to conduct both static and mobile surveillance as well. So it's sort of used on a case-by-case basis. Now, further to that, one of the main tools of insurers in the investigators in the insurance space is investigative interviews, as Leigh pointed to before. So that's questioning not only the claimant, but potentially witnesses and third parties, family members, co-workers, so on and so forth, to obtain further information that might be used within the investigation. Now, another source of information that is often used is obviously CCTV footage, as well as now that it's become more prevalent, dashcam footage. So all of these forms of information and surveillance are always used in a cross-reference sort of manner to gather as much information as possible.
We lost Peter. Oh, there he is.
Sorry, I'm back. Fantastic. Thanks for that, Chad. That's really, really useful. And again, apologies for my terrible Magnum PI reference. Over to you, Leigh. If an insurance company obtains surveillance or information on an injured person claiming compensation, how does it impact your claim, or how might it impact your claim?
Look, it can have no impact at all. It can reduce the overall amount of compensation paid, or it can completely obliterate it. It all depends on the surveillance of what the information that's obtained reveals about the injured person and the inconsistencies in the claim that have been made. So a lot of time, the purpose of obtaining surveillance is actually to undermine the credibility of the injured person. So where they've said one thing and then the insurance company can prove later on that they're doing something else. So, you know, if a person says that they're a quadriplegic, but the insurer has surveillance of them walking, you can almost guarantee that they're going to be alleging fraud pretty quickly, and it's going to have a rather detrimental effect on the claim. But if the claimant in a circumstances, is claiming that they've got a broken arm and the insurance company has got images of them with a broken arm, it's entirely consistent. So it'll have no impact at all in that circumstance. So it all depends on, the extent of what is obtained, but largely it's about the inconsistencies.
Thank you for that. And Chad, what is the best form of surveillance in your opinion, and why? There's obviously information on social media, the general sort of internet and different websites. There's old school investigations, like we mentioned before, involving surveillance, photos and video footage, but what is the best form?
Look, I don't think that there is a best form of surveillance, only a best for the circumstances. So investigators need to be astute and adaptable and know when a particular form of surveillance should be utilized, as well as how to use that form of surveillance to increase the viability of another form of surveillance. So you want to be able to use information as it becomes available, assess that information and disseminate it on a case-by-case basis. Now, in saying that, while I don't believe there's a best form of surveillance, I just think that it needs to be said, I do believe there is one case when there is a worst form of surveillance, and this is something that had often been used in the past, which is mobile or static surveillance in psychological injury claims. So trying to capture photographs or videos of a person suffering a psychological injury to prove whatever is often not very viable, because the injury is happening within the space of their own person. So that in that circumstance, that would be a worst form of surveillance. But in any other case, you need to be able to utilize all forms when they are required.
Fantastic, thank you. And Leigh, if surveillance or other information reveals perhaps that an injured person is acting deceitfully or fraudulently, what ramifications are there for that claim or the individual themselves?
Well, look, it can mean that the insurer doesn't have to pay any compensation at a minimum. It can result in payback if things have already been paid. So if an advance payment has been made, so the insurer may actually be able to recover the money that's already been paid as well. But beyond that, there's actually criminal ramifications as well, because it's fraud in a true sense. So if the individual pursuing the claim and anyone knowing or facilitating it, such as an accomplice, they can be liable for criminal prosecution, including jail time. And you see it quite a lot in the workers' comp space, probably more than what happens in the C2P space. But given that the fraud, given that the C2P scheme is now so similar, I don't believe it'll be too long before you see that kind of thing occurring, the prosecutions happening in C2P as well. So there have been some already in recent times, but you tend to see a little bit more in workers' comp, I think, because the schemes are a little bit more established.
Yeah. And that's good for everyone, really, because ultimately we're all paying the premiums, and for fraudulent, deceitful claims, that's putting our premiums up in all areas of insurance, which none of us want to see. So it's a really, really important point. Chad, what words of advice do you have for injured people pursuing a compensation claim, knowing that they may never actually know if they are actually being investigated?
Sure. So, look, as Leigh alluded to, there are the potentials for criminal prosecution. So, number one, if you're thinking about submitting a fraudulent claim or exaggerating a claim, don't. Insurers and investigators have many tools at their disposal, so the risk greatly outweigh the reward. Now, if you're just concerned about having strangers looking through your social media accounts, just set the privacy settings of those accounts to the highest settings. Ask your family and friends to do the same. It's not going to be foolproof if you're being investigated, especially if there's a dedicated and experienced open source investigator conducting the investigation. But using these privacy settings, it's better than doing nothing. Now, keeping a digital daily symptom and event log is something that I always advise people to do. So, for instance, if you're captured on video sprinting down the road whilst claiming a knee injury, having a record explaining that you're perhaps being chased by an aggressive dog and you had to run to avoid imminent danger, that could be an important piece of evidence if the matter is litigated. The fact that the digital log will have metadata showing that when an entry was made, as opposed to just writing the log on a piece of paper or having recollected that piece of information in the witness box, will give extra weight to the evidence when it's presented. Now, another piece of advice that I always try to give people is try not to get too stressed thinking about the fact that you're potentially being surveilled. Now, as humans, I think we're instinctively we have this aversion to thinking about the fact that we are potentially being hunted, and I think surveillance is one of those things that a predator will typically do to their prey. So most people will feel some form of stress when they just think about the concept of being surveilled. But the reality is that you're being surveilled by multiple parties and organizations every day. So every time you go shopping, every time you watch YouTube, when you're on Zoom, whenever you're on a digital device, information is being captured about you and stored in a way for somebody to get something out of you. It's just the nature of modern life. So just think of private investigators and mobile CCTV cameras, and continue on your day as normal, and try not to think about it and increase the level of stress that you might be feeling. But if you do have any concerns that a private investigator is acting illegally during the course of the investigation, go ahead and speak to your lawyer, because it's very important if you feel that you're being harassed or somebody is conducting themselves in an illegal manner, that something is done about it immediately.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that insight, Chad. Really, really important. A little bit scary as well, but it's good to know the facts. Leigh, what words of advice do you have for injured people from a legal perspective in terms of protecting themselves and their claim entitlements?
Look, I think it all comes back to consistency, right? So in CTP and workers' comp in particular, you are regularly getting medical certificates from your doctor that's imposing restrictions on your work and return to work and what you can and can't do. And those certificates, usually, if they're completed correctly, are pretty clear. So provided that information, you're acting in accordance with that information, it doesn't matter if an investigator is monitoring you, because everything you'll be doing is consistent. Where the inconsistency occurs is where you get into trouble. So just be smart about what you post online. Remember that everything that you post can be used against you. And if it's inconsistent, it will be. So because if you're sitting here saying, oh, I can't run, jump and skip, but they've got you doing that down at the park with your kids, it's completely inconsistent with the claim that's being made. So it's always important, number one, to keep your solicitor involved in what's going on with your rehab and the generally with as you're improving, but also so that the claim that's being made on your behalf is consistent with the evidence. Like Chad said, make sure that your social media accounts are set to private. Don't comment on anything to do with your claim. The insurer or and the accident or anything like that, all of that information can be captured, particularly if it's not on a private setting or if you're commenting on someone else's post that's not on a private setting. All of that information will be captured and used against you, potentially. So again, it's all just about being aware that what you're posting out in social media is public in a lot of circumstances. Even if your social media account is set to private, be aware it can be accessed by a court order. So even if it's set on private for now, if you get into court, it can be subpoenaed one way or the other. So whether it's for you or the Facebooks or the Metas of the world, that information can be subpoenaed. Again, if in doubt, like Chad mentioned, if in doubt, we're happy to speak to people and give them advice on this, because some people actually derive an income from being online. They need to have a social presence. So it's not an option for them to just set it on private and go, oh, I'm over. But it's all about managing what is posted and what is actually said. So for the people that actually have to, you are a public facing person, or you are a person that makes an earning out of being on social media, and you actually have to have that public presence, you in particular need to speak to a lawyer and make sure that what you're doing on a daily basis isn't going to be detrimental to your claim. And everything needs to be consistent with. So your lawyer needs to be informed regularly about what's going on in advance of you posting things. It seems onerous, but if you truly want to make sure that this kind of thing is not being used against you, that's the best way to do it. So they're probably the key points.
Yeah, that's a really important point. You don't have to be an international social media influencer, but so many of us still take part in some way, professionally or personally, on social media for a variety of reasons, and we need to do that for in some reasons. So that's really, really useful advice, Leigh. Well, that does bring us to the end of our questions section of the Q&A. But there is an opportunity if anyone has a burning question to certainly put your hand up, and you can ask the question live if you'd like. But of course, there is the chat function down the bottom of your screen where you can post a question as well, and I'll ask it on your behalf. We did have a couple of questions, though, that were emailed into us prior. So while I ask a couple of those, again, any burning questions, certainly pop them in the chat below or pop your hand up. But one of the first ones I had for Chad was, Do you have to disclose anything to a private investigator should they actually, make themselves known, or actually, come and ask you a question face to face, or try and garner information?
Well, that depends. If you're a witness, then you owe nothing to the investigator. You're basically cooperating on your own will. That obviously changes if the matter is litigated and you're summoned as a witness. But in terms of the injured party or the employer, then there is a stipulation that you do cooperate with the investigation. I'm sure Leigh can provide further in relation to that in terms of the legal aspects. But in general, the average person, no, they don't have to disclose anything to an investigator. It's up to the investigator to be able to, I guess, charm somebody into providing any information that they're seeking.
From our perspective, I would say don't speak to the investigator if you're a claimant or injured person. Cooperating with the investigation doesn't mean that you need to speak directly with the investigator. We regularly will block that and say, direct the questions to us and we will seek instructions. The reason for that is that if you're answering in real time, people tend to just verbal diarrhea and say literally everything and anything, not knowing whether it's adverse to their case or not. And so being able to have that legal counsel and understand the information that needs to be put to the insurer, because you also don't have to answer every question that's put to you by an investigator. You only have to answer the questions that are relevant to the circumstances of the case. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the time irrelevant information will be asked by an investigator, trying to broaden the scope of what's going on. If liability is clear, well, then they will move to things that try to reduce the overall quantum of the claim. And if you haven't necessarily got the information available at that point in time, you could be doing yourself some harm for the later aspect of the claim. So no, you don't. From directly speaking to them, you do have an obligation to actually assist with the claim. But it doesn't necessarily need to be, as long as that information is being conveyed to the insurer overall, it doesn't necessarily need to go to the investigator directly. So what happens with personal injury claims a lot of the time is that you'll give a statement of evidence. It doesn't necessarily need to go to the investigator, but it can go directly to the insurer. You'll provide particulars of the claim, which is a series of questions that the insurance company will ask us, and we will respond to them because it develops the claim itself. So typically, and the insurance companies will typically ask us additional questions if they don't have enough information. So ultimately, that information comes out at some point anyway. So I think the reason the insurance company likes to get things in advance, nice and early, is because they have to make a decision on liability once a claim is lodged. And whilst you might be impeding that process somewhat or slowing it down, it's always better to make sure that you're actually giving accurate and relevant information. So yeah, my advice to people is typically speak to your lawyer before speaking to the investigator, just so the lawyer is actually aware of what's going to be said and what the information that needs to be put there. If there's nothing controversial, the lawyer may just say, yeah, that's fine, go and speak to the private investigator. But typically, like here at Advantage, we tend to ask for a list of questions and try to respond with the claimant's instructions, as opposed to doing a recorded interview.
Excellent. That's really useful. A bit further to that, we had a question around rules of engagement. Are there any rules or codes of conduct or operating circumstances that a private investigator has to follow? Like, can they impersonate someone to garner information, for example? Can they try and talk to friends and family members pretending to be someone else, for example? What are the rules?
So no, we cannot impersonate another party. There are actually aspects in the legislation that require that we don't misrepresent ourselves. So, but look, in saying that, unfortunately, there are investigators that, in my experience, do that. They may contact a relative of the injured party online and say, "I am XYZ's friend. Can I add you on social media?" Then they have a vector to view whatever communication might be conveyed through the relatives or friends' Facebook page or other social media via that connection. Now, obviously, us working for plaintiffs' firms will try to identify this a lot of the time. But in general, legally, no, we cannot misrepresent ourselves, and there are consequences to doing so. So if there are any investigators watching this and considering misrepresenting themselves in future investigations, I would advise you not to.
That's really, really good to know. Well, with the, I guess, increases of compensation costs and payments, and the general sort of the general feel and situation in today's economy, I guess, is it fair to say that the level of surveillance and investigations is on the increase, and there's further scrutiny around that from private investigators?
Look, I believe investigations on a whole at the moment are increasing. So I guess the aspect of the financial situation for both the insurers and injured parties is causing a disruption in the typical approach in terms of negotiation. So disputes are increasing, and wherever there are disputes, investigations will increase. So the insurers at the moment, I think they're at a crossroads where they don't know how to approach the changing landscape. So in the last few months, there has been a great increase in investigations overall. But what will happen in the future now that, obviously investigations cost, right? So I believe that the money counters in the insurance companies will start to look at what the relevance of conducting all of these investigations will be. Is it worthwhile? If it is bringing them results, then it will probably maintain or increase. And if not, then we may see a reduction. But in general, over the last few months, yes, there has been an increase in surveillance as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. And you mentioned, sorry, you jumped in there, Leigh, sorry.
I was just going to say
you mentioned a couple of
in the workers' compensation scheme, I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but I'd imagine with insurance companies have in the past increased surveillance when there's been an influx of a particular type of claim. So in the workers' comp scheme at the moment, there has been a tremendous increase in psychological claims. And because psychological claims are subjective, surveillance tends to flow off the back of that because you can't point to anything physically broken. So I'd imagine, without any actual evidence, but I'd imagine that there would be an increase of surveillance in that particular type of dispute.
Absolutely. And Chad, you were talking about a couple of the, one of the flags which generally seems to, generally result in an investigation, that being a dispute. That certainly sounds like a common flag. What are some of the other flags that might trigger an investigation or further scrutiny on a claim? Is there generally a quantum involved, or are there other flags involved?
Look, it's multifaceted. So for one, we're looking at, so insurers have their intelligence processes where they will look at machine AI learning. They will look at, is there a particular pattern? And if there is a pattern, as Leigh mentioned, there may be a pattern in the case of psychological injury claims, which will then red flag many psychological injury claims. And it's not for the fault of the individual claimants, but it just fits a particular pattern that the intelligence processes are picking up. That might be a conduit to particular investigations being conducted. Now, alternatively, investigations may be conducted through other intelligence sources. So, for instance, in workers' compensation, the employer might contact the insurer and say, we don't believe that this insurance claim is legitimate for X, Y, and Z reasons. We believe it should be investigated further. And at that point, an investigation will be conducted. Now, another, look, I don't want to get into, the realms of, I guess, I don't want to sound like a sovereign citizen, but oftentimes particular backgrounds, particular demographics, particular locations, these are things that the individual claims managers in their own regard might consider suspicious and believe that they need to conduct an investigation in relation to a claim involving parties in a particular area. So there isn't one clear aspect that flags a claim for investigations. There are many, many reasons why claims are investigated. So it's quite difficult as a claimant to know why your particular case is being investigated. It might not be that you yourself have been flagged as a potential fraud risk, but the type of claim or where you are located, et cetera, might be the reason why your claim is being investigated.
Sometimes it could be as simple as the doctors that you're seeing. It could be your surname. There's a number of different things. It legitimately, it is non-prescriptive a lot of the time, and it's purely got to do with something that the insurance company believes might have a particular pattern to it, and the investigation flows off that. And like I said before, a large number of investigations will result in no finding at all. They won't even, the claimant or the injured person will be none the wiser that the investigation's gone on, and because nothing will come out of it. So a lot of this is just fact checking, making sure that things are all above board. And if you fit a particular profile of interest at the particular time, like I mentioned previously, the psychiatric claims, there's been an increase in psychiatric claims. That to me would be a typical insurer profile to have a look at if you fit within a certain criteria. So that's a way of looking at it. I think going back to the rules of engagement question though that was mentioned previously, each scheme has got quite different. They're not too different, but they've got workers' comp, CTP, and then general insurance things are all governed by slightly different rules of engagement. So you've got the general insurance code of practice. It's got certain rules of engagement or when the insurers should be doing things, and then you've got guidelines under the workers' comp and CTP schemes that have got similar things as well. So generally speaking, there's got to be a reason for engaging. But it can be pretty loose. It's largely up to a claims consultant and their discretion if there's no business directive. So, but again, like I said, if you do everything above board, you won't even know that the insurance company has investigated you.
Yeah, that's really really useful. You mentioned Chad AI. And that actually was another question that we had come in. And I guess, how is that currently being used or might assist investigations in the near future?
Again, it's just looking for patterns. So whether or not it's really beneficial, I believe it's yet to be determined. as Leigh mentioned, if it's a matter of looking for names that get flagged or locations that get flagged, pattern recognition, obviously, computer-generated pattern recognition is often superior to human abilities, but whether or not that's actually useful in countering fraud, sophisticated fraud, I really don't know. I don't think we have enough information to give us an answer to that. But I guess as AI advances and the facilitation of different types of data sets to use for pattern recognition also advances, then we may see the ability to pick out potentially fraudulent claims more readily. But in saying that, look, I've been in the insurance game for 20 odd years, and the really sophisticated insurance fraudulent schemes, they change all the time. So you need to be able to adapt very quickly. Maybe AI will be an answer to that, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Very interesting, and I guess it'll be a quite a rapidly changing environment. Well, I have really appreciated and certainly learnt a lot, even as the host. It's been really informative speaking to both yourself, Leigh, and Chad. I think it's one of these topics that it's important to be informed about and to be educated and have an understanding and awareness of. It's not anything to be too concerned about or scared of, but being informed is the right approach to understand what you need to do or how you might be able to assist any friends, family members who maybe are facing these circumstances we've been discussing tonight. And that's really important. So feel free to share that. We're obviously going to be continuing to share really important subjects such as what we have tonight in ongoing quarterly webinars with Advantage Legal, and we always appreciate their insights. Chad, thank you so much for your time and contributions in the webinar tonight as well. It's been very informative, and it's not an insight which we would have been able to gather from anyone else. So it's been very useful to have you on board and for you to openly and honestly share your experience and your skills and your insights.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Were there any final words to wrap up at all, Leigh or Chad? Have I missed anything?
I might just mention that if you did want some additional information and you're not a Bicycle New South Wales member or missed it in the circulars, we have actually done a couple of articles on the impact of social media and the insurance investigators. So they're on our website under the news and articles tab, so advantagelegal.com.au. So if you're interested sort of in a little bit more, fleshing out what we've had to say here, there is a little bit more information there that you can read. So by all means, drop in and have a look at that. Alternatively, if we can be of assistance to, please reach out. We're always happy to help.
Yeah, great. That's really useful for people if they're seeking further resources or information and advice. And we'll obviously continue posting similar information as well, sharing Advantage Legal's information so that we're getting that critical and useful, important information out to people should they need it or should they have someone that they need to assist in those circumstances we've mentioned. So yeah, really appreciate the tips, the insights and the understanding. Like I mentioned before, have learned so much tonight myself. We know that if we're doing the right thing, then there's certainly nothing to worry about. So that's one of the other key messages as well. But we do need to be careful and take some precautions like Leigh and Chad have both mentioned tonight. So again, gentlemen, Leigh Davidson and Chad El Masri, really, really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for all of our participants who've been able to join us as well. And thank you for the questions that have been put forward from people who want a little bit further information. Make sure you all ride safely, and I look forward to joining you for a webinar in the near future. Thank you for your time.